The LA Chargers are in the middle of a retooling phase, and after an offseason full of changes, today let's talk about the LA Chargers and why I actually think they could be a pretty fun team to watch next year. So the way we're going to be doing this video is similar to a lot of my other videos. We'll start off by talking about the positive things I do like about this Chargers team moving forward, and then we'll go on to some things that I don't really love about this Chargers team, and then at the very end, I'll give you guys my unofficial opinion on this LA Chargers team and what I think they could actually do in 2024. Let's get started. So to go ahead and start off the video, I always like to typically start off with the personnel on the roster, and let's just get this out of the way. The LA Chargers do have a lot of gaping holes, but there are some talented players on this team. For starters, the number one thing you have to talk about with this Chargers team when you do talk about the Chargers is, of course, Justin Herbert, who in my opinion is a definitive top 10 to top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Whenever you have a guy like Justin Herbert who's in the conversation with guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson, you're always going to be a pretty fun team to watch and typically a pretty good team overall. It is unfortunate that a lot of Justin Herbert's prime years thus far have been wasted with inadequate coaching and inadequate roster construction, but I do feel like now they're actually heading into a nice place with a good head coach who we'll talk about here in a little bit, as well as a roster that is officially retooling to what his strengths are. Moving off of course, Justin Herbert, though, I think the offensive tackles on this team are fantastic. Rashawn Slater has been a staple of this offense for the past several years, and he's going to be sticking at that left tackle position where I think he should be incredible yet again. Then you have Joe Alt, who's actually going to be moving over to the right tackle position, at least that's what we think is going to happen. And everything I've heard about Joe Alt so far has been that he is who we think he is, and I do think he's going to be a fantastic right tackle in this league for many years, and I think as long as you have two tackles who are fantastic, and of course a guy like Justin Herbert, your offense should be fine. When you look at this defense, I don't really love a lot of the pieces of the defense, but there are a couple studs in this defense, such as Derwin James, who is of course one of the best safeties in the NFL. You also have a couple other underrated players like Tuli Tuipulotu, as well as Alohi Gilman, who I think are fantastic. You also of course have to keep in mind there are guys like Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, and Asante Samuel Jr., who have been productive and proven players for many years now. And while I feel like guys like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa are tailing off at this stage in their career, they still are productive guys who can easily get you close to 10 sacks in a season. We'll just have to wait to see how much they can give next year. But the nice thing is that for the most part in the edge rushers and linebacking room, there is some solid depth there. Again, Tuli Tuipulotu is somebody who I expect to take a dramatic step forward next year as that edge rusher slash interior pass rusher. And then of course Morgan Fox is a consistent rotational guy who I think is going to be able to take even more steps forward next year. In the linebacking core, Junior Colson should fill in nicely alongside Denzel Perryman. Denzel Perryman at this stage of his career is not somebody who you expect to be fantastic in coverage, but he could definitely go down and make a big hit. He's solid in run support, and again, he's a veteran in this room, so don't expect too much from him, but also don't expect him to be straight trash. I was really high on Junior Colson. He was my number 2 ranked linebacker in this year's draft behind Edgerrin Cooper, and I really feel like Junior Colson is sort of the whole package of what you would want in that middle linebacker position. The question for Junior Colson is going to be how quickly can he translate his game from Michigan into the NFL level, because I do expect him to be a full-time starter day one. Going back to the offense, I failed to mention a couple guys who I do like on the offense. I loved the draft pick of Ladd McConkey in the second round. I think he's a special player who can play both inside and outside in that receiving core. You pair him with guys like Joshua Palmer, DJ Chark, Quentin Johnston, and hopefully Brendan Rice, and I actually think that receiving core can be okay and maybe not as bad as we might think it is. Obviously, they moved off of a lot of guys, and I think that was the right move. Of course, Justin Herbert isn't playing with guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams anymore. It is an obvious downgrade in the receiving room, but I think they've done a decent job of addressing their issues after they got rid of those guys. Speaking of getting rid of those guys, by losing out on guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, it has actually allowed them to open up a pretty substantial amount of cap space. Whenever you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert who's going to be making a ton of money the next couple years, it is always nice to have a little bit of extra change so you can spend on other players. And by moving off of those guys, they were able to do so. As it sits right now, they have $27 million in cap space, and next year, based off everything that I'm seeing right now, they have $54 million opened up, and if they were to cut a guy like Joey Bosa, it would of course open up even more. So while the roster may not be a finished product right now, it can definitely be much better next year after they're able to open up some more cap space and have more cap flexibility. Moving off of the personnel and of course the money side of things, I love the hire of Jim Harbaugh. I think he was a fantastic head coach for the Michigan Wolverines for many years, and I like his identity as a head coach. A run-first, experienced head coach who loves to run the football, loves to pound it down your throat. Pause, no diddy. And of course, for a guy like Justin Herbert, I think he's going to benefit a ton from the play style this new Chargers team is going to be playing like. Instead of all the pressure on the world being on Justin Herbert's shoulders, it is now going to be more spread out evenly on this offense from guys like Justin Herbert to Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins in this receiving core. I think this will be a nice marriage between Herbert and Harbaugh for the next several years within their careers. The last thing I do want to mention before we start talking about some of the negative things, and this is more of a big picture thing heading into 2024, but they actually have a relatively easy schedule next year. Yes, of course, you have to play the Kansas City City Chiefs in the entire AFC North. But outside of those handful of games, this is a really easy schedule for this team. You open up in a 4-game stretch with Las Vegas, Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Kansas City. And while I don't expect this team to go 4-0, I could easily see them going 3-1 to 2-2 within this stretch. Then you have a week 5 bye week, which is absolutely criminal. NFL, please stop giving teams a week 5 bye week. That is brutal. Then coming out of the break, you have Denver, Arizona, New Orleans, Cleveland, Tennessee, and Cincinnati. A couple of those games are not very easy, but I could easily see them going 3-3, 4-2 within that stretch. Then you have Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City. I don't expect them to win any of those games. Those are just tough matchups. But then to end the season off, you have 4 pretty easy matchups against the Buccaneers, the Broncos, the Patriots, and the Raiders. Again, not saying they're going to win all those games, but they should be able to win at least 2 or 3 of those games. So I don't know exactly which games they're going to win and which games they're going to lose, but just kind of broadly looking at the schedule, it's not the hardest schedule I've seen out there. Well, we talked about some of the positive things, and trust me, there's a lot of positives going for this LA Chargers team, but let's now actually talk about some of the negative teams. We'll start off with some personnel, and then we'll go bigger picture on this one. And to start off with the personnel and kind of going back to that receiving core, it's just not a fantastic receiving core, especially to what it has been the past couple years. Again, earlier in the video, I complimented them by saying they've done a decent job of rebuilding that room after cutting those guys, and I still stand by that. But regardless of how I feel about them rebuilding the room, it is obviously a much worser unit this year than it was last year. Whenever you lose out on a guy like Keenan Allen, who is a continuous Pro Bowl level player, and Mike Williams, who's been a solid go-getter type of guy down the field, and replace them with Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnston, who was a disappointment last year and a brand new rookie, is just kind of questionable. Again, I'm not necessarily blaming the front office because I thought it was something that they had to do. It was either those two guys or Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, and I feel like they could address the receiving core in future years and within this year rather than the edge rushers department. So again, it makes sense. I don't necessarily blame them on that one. But kind of going back to what I'm talking about though, this unit is just not fantastic. I will say I do think these guys can play off of each other quite well. Joshua Palmer and DJ Chark will more than likely be your down the field stretchers, with guys like Quentin Johnston being your playmaker. Think of him as like a taller Deebo Samuel like player. I would imagine that Jim Harbaugh, if any coach out there, would likely know what to do with Quentin Johnston because, well, he got torched by them against TCU versus Michigan. And then of course Ladd McConkey is your do-it-all smaller receiver, but he's kind of Cooper Kupp-ish like, so I'm excited to see what they can do with him. I will say I think the upside for this room is actually pretty high. If Quentin Johnston can develop into a nice receiver too alongside Ladd McConkey, Brandon Rice, DJ Chark, and Joshua Palmer, I think this actually has some high upside. But if I had to bet money on it, I don't think they'll quite hit that upside next year. I think this team would really benefit from having just a true alpha receiver one, so that there is some better hierarchy within this team. But again, I don't think it's a bad unit per se. Where it does get a little bit bad is going to be the interior offensive line and the interior defensive line. It's a bit better on the offensive line side of things because I do believe in Corey Linsley and him bouncing back. In 2023, he was a little bit up and down, but also dealt with a lot of injuries. And when he was healthy in 2022, he was actually a really solid center in the middle. The question for me happens to be with their guards. Again, the tackle room is fantastic, but Zion Johnson and currently what I imagine is going to be Jamari Salyer or Jordan McFadden / Brendan James, one of those guys will be the right guard, and I just don't know if I like any of those options. Could you maybe get away with putting a Bradley Bozeman in the right guard room? Maybe, but I don't know. That's a little bit questionable in and of itself. Zion Johnson has been inconsistent throughout his young career. A lot more downs than ups, especially last year where it was just kind of mid the entire season. And Sawyer is arguably the worst right guard in the NFL at this point. He gave up like 6 sacks last year as a right guard, which is crazy. And yes, it probably didn't help a guy like Sawyer to be playing alongside some terrible centers last year, but at the same time, 6 sacks is kind of crazy. The defensive line wise, again, I like the edge rushers and I like the depth they have, but when your two interior nose tackles are Poona Ford, Otito Ogbonnia, and Gerard Clark, it's a little bit questionable. Again, I imagine a guy like Tuli Tuipulotu will be playing a little bit in that interior defensive line, as well as I imagine their 4th round pick in Justin Eboigbe will also be getting a lot of run this year. I just really question what the production of Justin Eboigbe is going to be in his rookie year, and given the fact you have 2 interior defensive linemen who are just honestly straight trash, is a bit questionable. Again, it is nice having guys like Denzel Perriman and Junior Colson who are good down the field guys who can definitely help in run support, but those interior guys are just not that fantastic. Hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, a guy like Justin Eboigbe and Tuli Tuipulotu can fill in that spot and play at a good level. Then the last thing personnel wise that I do have a big issue with is going to be in their cornerback room. I like Asante Samuel Jr., but typically I like him as my cornerback 2, not my cornerback 1. And Christian Fulton is your technical current as of like today, their 2nd best cornerback, and I'm just not a big fan of him at all. He was god awful last year for Tennessee, and if you ask any Tennessee Titans fan about Christian Fulton, they'll probably throw up in their mouth because he was god awful. And he's been mid to awful for the past several years, and if he's going to be a starter for this team, then man, I'm worried about that. Behind him though, you do have Cam Hart, who was actually pretty high on coming out of Notre Dame. Is he going to start? Probably not, and I don't think he should, but if you have to, I don't think it'd be the worst thing in the world. Then you have just Spencer Taylor, who I'm okay with. I'm okay with him being a starter. We'll see if he can take over Christian Fulton's role. I'd honestly rather play Taylor than Fulton if you're asking me. But then big picture wise, you just kind of have to look at the entire AFC. I talked about this in my Tennessee Titans video, but the entire AFC in general is just freaking stacked. If you look at the AFC East, you have 3 genuine contenders in the Jets, Dolphins, and Bills. Then in the North, you have the Ravens, Bengals, Browns, and Steelers, who are just 4 freaking awesome teams. The South is, of course, Texans, Colts, Jaguars, and Titans, who should all be pretty solid teams next year as well, especially Houston and Indianapolis. And then within your own division, you of course have to deal with the likes of the Chiefs and the Raiders. So I'm not saying that this Chargers team is going to be the worst of those teams I talked about, but I could definitely see them struggling to compete with a lot of those teams. And of course, when you're trying to make a playoff run, it's just going to be very difficult when there's so many good teams who are also trying to compete for that championship run as well. So I gave you guys the good, I gave you guys the bad. Let's talk about the big picture. How good is this team going to be in 2024? Hate to break the news to you, and I know I've been in a lot of heat with Chargers fans. They're not going to be that good next year. I think they'll win somewhere between the lines of 4 to 8 games next year. Again, schedule's pretty easy, so it wouldn't shock me if I was completely wrong on that one. And if I am, then I'll potentially come back to this video and make an apology. I've been in a lot of beef with Chargers fans. I just cannot buy in with this current roster given how good the rest of the AFC is. And I've said this multiple times throughout my time here on YouTube. I think this Chargers team is heading in the right direction. They had to make a lot of draws as to who they're going to cut and who they're going to replace them with. And I think they've done a decent job up to this point. Again, I think they're going to be a fun offense with some really good tackles, some fun wide receivers, and of course Justin Herbert. But I just question if they can really get the job done to make a playoff spot. If I had to guess, as I said earlier, 4 to 8 wins. I know that's a kind of a wide margin, but it's a little bit hard to appropriately guess where this team's going to go. I will say this, if I am wrong, Justin Herbert is probably the MVP. Jim Harbaugh is probably coach of the year because this team is just not that great right now. Give it 2, maybe 1 year. They could be freaking awesome. But you guys tell me. I know I've had beef with Chargers fans before, so Chargers fans, if I'm wrong, tell me in the comment section below and I'll hear you guys out. But I love you guys. Peace.